I was always a liberal. The progressives were sort of liberals on steroids. You know, they were screaming about everything all the time and they were angry and everybody else was a racist and all this stuff. And I was there for about a year and a half, 2 years. And then because I was so in the middle of the hysteria with them, that's when I started waking up to what leftism was.
How can we be who we're meant to be based on the vision of our faith if we're denied the right to employ and engage people and even present the true nature of the human person?
When children are greeted, asking them, which pronouns do you prefer? What do you mean? They are confusing kids unnecessarily.
Yes, ultimately, where we get our hope from as Christians is that Jesus is still on the throne. That's not changed.
That's what submission means. It doesn't mean being trampled down, but it means being a stakeholder. Leadership is action, not position.
We are here until, say, law, which allows babies to have the same rights as everybody else, and we're not going to go away. I can guarantee that we won't.
But we have to see the bigger picture. If we don't get everything we want, there's no reason to give up. You keep fighting more.
And the government have weaponized feelings, and they're effectively creating blasphemy laws to outlaw Christianity, the foundation of our nation.
May we continue to boldly stand as a light in the darkness, a voice for truth, and a force for good.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Here I Stand podcast, a podcast by the Young Conservatives for Christ, which is available, again, it's available on YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, with clips going up on Instagram as well, and all the links are available in the description. And today I have a very special guest all the way from America, well known in the conservative world, Dave Rubin. Following his sold-out tour with Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, host of the Rubin Report, returns to Australia this October for 3 exclusive can't-miss shows in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. He'll be performing here in Melbourne at the Capitol Theatre on October the 18th with Peta, Credlin, the Concourse Concert Hall in Sydney with on October the 21st with John Anderson, and the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre on October the 27th with British journalist Andrew Neil. David Rubin, welcome to the podcast.
John, it's good to be with you, and I appreciate you waking up early for me. Our 10-hour time difference is not easy to do a media tour with Australia from the Free State of Florida.
Absolutely not, but it's you got to be dedicated to these things.
Indeed. Well, it's good to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And first, I want to start off a bit about you. I'm curious sort of how you got into the media space, how you got into the conservative media space, and how you sort of got into where you are today, and sort of, what's your journey?
Well, how I got into the media space and then how I got into the conservative media space, though, those are 2 movies of a trilogy, I would say, right, which would lead to the third story, the third part of the trilogy, which I'm in right now. But briefly on the sort of how I started in all of this. I graduated college in 1998. I was born in 1976, so 22 years later, graduate college, and I started doing stand-up comedy in New York City. And I had all the successes and failures and frustrations and great moments of that, standing out on street corners, handing out tickets in Times Square and doing the road gigs and, living that life. And I did that for about a decade, a little bit more in New York City. And that was sort of right at the beginning, around 2010, 2011, was kind of right at the beginning of when podcasting was starting. And I had done some stuff on AM radio, and then I had a show on Sirius XM when satellite radio was still pretty powerful at that point. And then I heard about this podcast thing. Everybody started walking around with an iPhone in their pocket. And I started doing a podcast, which I wasn't even sure what a podcast was. I had this guy that I was doing some radio stuff with, and he's like, maybe, we're on Sirius, we should do a podcast. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was on the phone. I didn't know how to download it or anything, but we did kind of like a little comedy podcast, and that really started taking off. And then around 2013, early 2013, I went out to LA to do a show on the Young Turks network. Young Turks are still exist. They were a very far left network. I was never that far lefty. I was what I always describe as a classical liberal, but I went on their network to do a guest appearance on a TV show in LA. And when the show ended, a guy came up to me. I didn't know who he was. And he said, "Oh, Dave, that was great. That was really wonderful." And I said, "Well, I'd love to do a show with you guys." I didn't know who he was. He literally could have been the janitor or the president of the network. Turned out it was the CEO of the network. And he was like, oh, well, let's figure it out. Let's make it happen. And a few months later, I moved to LA, started doing my show with the Young Turks. And then I was sort of, let's say, put into the really hardcore progressive worldview of politics. And again, I was always a liberal. The progressives were sort of liberals on steroids. You know, they were screaming about everything all the time, and they were angry, and everybody else was a racist and all this stuff. And I was there for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And then because I was so in the middle of the hysteria with them, that's when I started waking up to what leftism was. So in some sense, I look back and I'm very lucky that by being part of something that was kind of crazy, I mean, just calling everybody racist and everybody was a bigot and everybody was a homophobe and all of that stuff. And it was at the beginning of YouTube, and you know, when YouTube became political and all that. By becoming part of it so early, I woke up to it very early. So I think that was one of the things that put me on the map, because as I started questioning identity politics, as I started questioning, you know, it was well before we called it wokeness. It was before we talked about cancel culture, all of these things that we now know. But I just started questioning it and talking about it, and nobody on the left really was talking about it. There were a few people on the right, you know, Ben Shapiro, a couple other people on the right that early those years were talking about it a bit. But nobody on the left was. And I think by me starting to wake up to some of the hysteria around the left, and then really kind of make some move to talk to people on the right, I think that's the thing that really is when my career took off, is that I started saying, okay, I've been around these lefties. They're screaming about everything all the time. They're really angry. Something's not quite right here. Let me talk to some people on the right. And then I talked to Ben Shapiro, and I talked to Dennis Prager and Larry Elder and Jordan Peterson and Glenn Beck, and you know, the list goes on and on and on. And what I found was, even though at that time I still had some political differences with them, I found conservatives to be nicer, more thoughtful, generous of spirit and time, and fundamentally better explainers of their arguments than anyone on the left. And then I did a video around 2016 or so called Why I Left the Left for PragerU. And that thing took off. I mean, it's got well over 20 million views. And really I became, I guess, I was sort of the first one on the left to raise the alarm, raise the level of craziness, to bring it to sort of national attention in an American sense. And, you know, I guess one thing that I'm proud of over the years is that a lot of people ended up realizing that I was right about some of this stuff. You know, if you connect this, the second part of your question was, how did I kind of get into the conservative world? Well, then I started talking to the conservatives. And what I found was conservatives were willing to agree to disagree, and they wanted to find people that they disagreed with and still be part of a movement with them. And I think that's very much what led to Trump. I mean, Trump is not a traditional conservative by any stretch. He's a wide tent America guy. And that's what would lead a guy like me that definitely still has some of my more liberal leanings. I mean, I wrote a book defending classical liberalism. I think it's the best-selling book on classical liberalism maybe ever. But it leads me to defend my liberal beliefs via, I would say, a conservative lens. And that is the same road that I think Elon Musk went down, Joe Rogan went down. So many people who are not radicals, they're not crazy, but they have common sense. They want to defend free speech and much more. So it's about being pro-America for me. It's about being pro-freedom, pro-individual. Those are things that happen to fit much better within, let's say, the conservative movement these days than, unfortunately, the liberal movement, because the word has just been so hijacked by the progressives.
That's very interesting. And I'm thinking, based on that, you were saying you were more of a classical liberal before you joined the conservative movement. Do you think in America, most, like on the left, do you think most people are conservative liberals and the radicals are just the people that are heard more? Or do you think like a lot more people than we think are more on the radical sort of scale of things?
That's a great question, and it's very hard to figure out. And I try my best. You know, it's interesting. I really try to make the distinction between liberal and leftist. It's a very important distinction to make, because liberal means you believe in individual rights. You want laissez-faire economics. You believe in logic and reason. You have a very strong defense of free speech. You believe in a pluralistic democrat society. Leftist has much more in common with socialism. You want sort of centralized control over most things via whether that's speech or economics, and goes all the way down. You like control over things. If the government just has enough control to tell the people how to live, then everything will be okay. Of course, we know this never works because you're going to end up having to kill an awful lot of people to get everyone to behave the way you want. However, from an American perspective, and I think you guys have through many countries, not just Australia, but UK, the word liberal has been really abused so that nobody really understands what it means anymore. So if from an American perspective, if I say to somebody, I'm a true liberal, or if Bill Maher says he's a true liberal, I'm an old school liberal, I'm a classical liberal, in most people's head, they think that means leftist, because the progressives were able to basically get into the Democratic Party and annihilate all of the liberals. So there's very few liberals now that stand for liberal principles. There are a lot of conservatives actually that stand for liberal principles. So my belief actually is that most Americans, if you polled 350 million Americans as to what their beliefs are and what they want America to be, most Americans actually are classical liberals. Now, there is a conservative component to that maybe is a little bit more on the religious side, which I'm happy to discuss if you want. But most Americans are live and let live. Most Americans don't want big government. Most Americans want individual liberty and freedom and things of that nature. But that unfortunately, within the American lexicon, has very little to do with the word liberal. When I go to the UK, for example, it's a little bit easier to say I'm an old school liberal, and they kind of understand what I'm saying. Where they can make that distinction between that and leftist. I'm not exactly sure where that falls on an Australian scale, let's say, but I'm looking forward to discussing that a bit more when I get there. But that really is the problem. It's sort of why I don't say liberal that much anymore. If I'm on a TV show, it's too confusing to explain to people, yes, I'm a liberal, but I'm for limited government and individual rights. It just, they can't compute it. When I'm talking to somebody who understands politics and a little bit more about history and the Enlightenment and where liberalism came from and de Tocqueville and you know, John Stuart Mill and all those things, I can explain it properly. But usually for shorthand, I usually just say I'm on the more liberal side of the conservative movement.
No, that's interesting. We don't use over here the word liberal as much when we're describing them towards the maybe more conservative, towards the more, I don't know, leftist side of the conservative movement. Liberal is actually just a term we use to describe the Conservative Party, sort of what we used to describe the Republican Party if we were over there. So that's really interesting.
Right. Well, and that makes more sense. It's why I always say defending my liberal beliefs is becoming a conservative position, right? So liberalism, as I just laid out, true liberalism has way more in common with the conservative ideology of 2025 than leftism does. I have nothing to do with the modern progressive party. Every single thing that they stand for of authoritarian control and identity politics and all of those things has nothing to do with liberalism. The conservatives actually, in many cases, you can find common cause with a conservative and a liberal. So when I hear you say that, that actually makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think as an outside observer of America, like as Australians, we're always watching America and we're always thinking what happens in America will eventually affect us. And one thing we always see is that over there, it seems like everything is way more politicized than here. That over here, nobody wants to talk about politics. No one's interested. We have compulsory voting, but most people are more like a donkey vote. They don't really consider how their values actually interact with the way they vote. Because it's sort of like a two-party system. We've got minor parties, but because they don't have the money, they don't play in as much to the equation. I'm curious how, in America, how do people's values affect the way they vote? Like, do people maybe, like, if someone was, I don't know, let's say on that, maybe on the liberalism side, right? They're on the liberalism side, but would they more likely to vote? Would they be more likely to vote for a Democrat just because they think they're on the more leftist side? That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, if you so by liberal you meant classically liberal the way we've laid out here, correct?
Yes,
right.
Exactly. Classical liberal.
Right. So generally, until these last few years, the old school liberals were Democrats. This is Bobby Kennedy. This is Tulsi Gabbard. It's Rogan. It's Elon Musk. It's me. Some of those people that I think you understand, like these are sort of largely centrist people, I would say, ended up being Democrats. What now has happened, I think the last election was the proof of that, is those people really have been purged out of the Democrat Party. There's very few people I can say are true liberals that are still in the Democrat Party. It's mostly a party of radicals at this point. So, you know, you might say, okay, maybe Bill Maher is still a Democrat, maybe. John Fetterman is a senator from Pennsylvania who seems to be a little more liberal, or at least less in lockstep with the progressives. But largely, I would say the progressives, as bad as I think their ideas are, I will give them credit. They took the Democrat Party and they have made it into a very radical party. The home for somebody who's a live and let live liberal, that maybe is a little more big government when it came to, I don't know, social programs, or maybe is more okay with abortion or something like that, they have a much better chance of finding common cause with people on the right than people on the left at this point. But I would also say, I would also say to the first part of what you said, which is that you guys sort of watch us and you can't believe how political everything is that's what, even though I'm somebody that talks about politics for a living, that's actually something that's kind of depressing from an American perspective. Everything here has become politicized. You turn on sports and they're talking about politics. You turn on a music show and they're talking about race. And that's become very dangerous in a way, because, you know, you need escapes. You need escapes as a society so that you realize you have some things in common. Politics usually is about division one way or another. It's kind of us versus them. In the old days, you would turn on sports, or you'd watch a music show or go to a concert or whatever, and you'd escape all that stuff. Now you go to a concert and somebody's screaming about Trump, or you turn on a basketball game and they're lecturing you about racism. And that is not good for the culture.
No, absolutely. I definitely agree. And I think here we've sort of hit the balance, the bad balance, where now nobody wants to talk about politics, because if you do talk about politics, then that will get to a place where we'll become like America. It's sort of not a joke, but a thing that's often said around here is, do you really want to become like America? And in that politicized sense. So that's really interesting insight. And I'm curious more personally, obviously as an ex-liberal, well, still liberal, ex-leftist.
See, you can already see why the language gets screwy.
Yeah,
but I got
it's crazy.
Go ahead.
Yeah. As an ex-leftist, just turning conservative, but you're also still gay, which is not traditionally part of the conservative type movement. Have you faced any like pushback from the conservative movement as it is today?
Well, it's interesting. You know, first off, there are a lot of people who are gay, who are, if we want to say, small c conservatives. So Peter Thiel and Douglas Murray and Spencer Clavin and Rick Grinnell, and the list goes on and on and on. If by being part of the conservative movement, it means that you want to be able to live a functional life and have a relationship with someone that flourishes and hopefully have a family. I mean, these are actually very conservative ideals. Now, I understand that the idea of two guys in a relationship or two girls in a relationship, that in and of itself is not the most conservative thing. But if you believe, as most conservatives do, that the family unit and people having relationships that last the test of time, and if I could be biblical for a moment, if you want to build that Jacob's ladder with somebody for the next generation, if you believe in all of those things, and you also believe in limited government, and you also believe in individual rights, and you also believe in freedom of association, then there shouldn't be that much of a chasm for conservatives to be, it's a silly way to say it, but basically to be okay with gays. Now, I'm actually of the position that anyone can believe whatever they want from a religious perspective. So I would never have the government, I would never force the government to force a church to perform a gay marriage or a temple or a mosque. Now, ironically, on the left, you know, they seemingly hate Christianity. They love Islam. There's not one mosque in the United States that performs gay weddings, but they don't say a word about that. But what I would demand out of my government is equality under the law. And that is what we have in the United States. So I think that allowing people to enter the same relationship that you would allow anyone else to enter, and to help create the basic building blocks of a society, I think that any secular liberal state has that duty to their citizens. But again, you're entitled to whatever your private religious beliefs are. I just wouldn't want someone legislating them.
No, that's interesting.
But I will also say this. Yes, are there some more religious conservatives that are probably not thrilled with me? Yes, that's okay. The conservative movement, and I would credit Trump for this. Trump widened the tent to the point that he was able to get these people that you would think would normally be at odds with each other. He's got them under the same tent. So, you know, when Trump was running the first time, Peter Thiel gave a speech at the Republican National Convention. And he went up there and he said, "I'm a proud gay man." I know Peter fairly well. He told me privately after, and he said it publicly since, he had no idea what was going to happen when he said that. He didn't know if he was going to get booed. He got applause. It does not mean that everyone in that room has the exact same religious beliefs that he has. And he actually has, I think, some fairly traditional religious beliefs. But what it meant was, hey, we're all in America together. And do you love this place? And do you want to flourish in it? And that's going to supersede, from a public perspective, what our private religious beliefs might be.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know a word that the phrase that's been thrown around over there in the past few years is idea of Christian nationalism, though it's not defined well, or it's often used as a slur. How do you see the Christian involvement in political terms over there? Because if over here, if a Christian got involved in politics in any form, they would say you should keep your religion out of politics. Your views shouldn't define how you're interacting with politics, because you have to keep that. We have to, like, somehow the secularists are sort of neutral, but everyone else isn't. All the Christians aren't neutral, but the secularists are. I'm curious how that Christian element has sort of come into the political movement there in America.
Well, I would say it's something that's bubbling a little bit more online than I think it's bubbling into reality of our politics a bit. I would say to the backdrop of, you know, Charlie's assassination, because Charlie so publicly talked about his Christian faith, it does seem like it's becoming a little bit more of a part of the conversation right now. Look, everyone that's involved in politics or in public life, something frames the way you think about the world. And for most people, that is either for most people, it's something religious, whether you sort of understand it or not. Meaning you could, if you're a very religious person, whatever religion it might be, then it's pretty obvious how your religious views would supersede or come before your political views, that your political views would be born out of your religious views. But I would say even for most secular people, I think this is to your point, their views didn't materialize out of nothing, right? Like the Western world sits on the back of thousands of years of Judeo-Christian values. You know, Ben Shapiro talks about this, basically the ideas of Jerusalem and Athens, and that these things came tied together. The Socratic method came tied together with the history that was born out of Jerusalem. So without going too deep into that, I would say I don't mind at all if a politician speaks about their faith, whatever their faith is, as long as they're speaking about it honestly and earnestly. What I think you don't want is you don't want them legislating their beliefs. Now, but again, their beliefs might have something to do with their policy. So obviously, if your religion dictates that you're absolutely anti-abortion, that's going to come out in a policy. But what I think you want to do as a politician, and again, this is where I think Trump absolutely excels, is you want to create a movement that will maximize freedom for as many people as possible. And sometimes that means you're not going to get exactly what, say, the religious version of you might want.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And you mentioned Charlie Kirk a second ago, and I think we'll talk about that now. Yeah, there was a horrible tragedy of him being assassinated. I was absolutely heartbroken when I heard it. Like, I heard it almost immediately, and yeah, I'm curious, when you heard about the news, and maybe what your connection is with Charlie.
Yeah, well, I was on a Zoom meeting, and when you're on a Zoom meeting and you've got 5 windows open, you basically always have something else open too. And I saw something pop up on Twitter that he had been shot. It became pretty obvious to me within about 10 seconds that everybody else in the meeting had seen something too, because we all kind of went quiet, and there was this weird moment, and then I don't even remember if anyone even said anything. We just ended the meeting. That was in my office upstairs in my house. I walked down to the studio here, which is also in my house, and immediately my team all told me, Charlie's been a friend of mine for years. We've done these college events for years. He's been in this room and we've done shows together. It wasn't until, what was it, maybe an hour and a half later or so that we found out that he was actually murdered. So there was, there was a weird hour and a half window for that. I mean, I can tell you a lot of things about Charlie. What I can mostly tell you about Charlie is he really thrived in the debate. He loved having the debate. He loved talking to people who were different than him. That's what brought us together originally, because I was more liberal, he was more conservative, and that's what we would talk about on college campuses. So he was the real deal. He was a good man, and in many ways, everybody says, oh, we got to reach out to the other side. We got to talk to people that are different than us and all those things. Everyone says it. Very few people do it. He was doing it more than anybody else, and he'll be sorely, sorely missed. And I think his assassination, this is the biggest political assassination we've had in America in at least 40 years. Ronald Reagan was shot in the 80s, but didn't die. Donald Trump was shot 2 years ago, but didn't die. But, since basically JFK, MLK, so it's really more than 40 years. That's 50 plus years. But this thing is big. It has affected people in a very, very big way. He had a huge audience with young people, and he will be sorely missed, but his ideas are not gone. If anything, they're stronger than they were 10 days ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know almost every young person that I know under the age of 30 has definitely at least seen a video of Charlie Kirk, like minimum. His impact has gone global here in Australia. I went to a video actually last night, and there was about 3,000 or so people here in Victoria, which is basically the socialist capital of Australia. So,
well, that's a good sign. That's a good sign.
It definitely is. It definitely is a good sign. I'm curious if you've got like a personal interaction or a behind the scenes interaction that you had with Charlie Kirk that maybe a side that people haven't seen, or just something in general.
Sure. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was doing my last book tour, so Don't Burn This Country, and I was doing a show in Phoenix, and that's where Turning Point's headquarters are. That's where the memorial was a couple of days ago. And I called Charlie and I asked him if he could open for me on the tour, just, go up before I do my thing and, talk for 10 minutes, crack a couple jokes. He can make fun of me. I was like, whatever you want to do, Charlie, I totally trust you. And he immediately said yes. And he called me the morning of the show and he said, Dave, Charlie was very tall. People don't realize how tall he was. He was like 6'4", 6'5". That's pretty tall. I don't know how you guys measure that. But he was a pretty tall guy. He was quite a good basketball player. He called me that morning. He was in a ton of back pain. He had ongoing back pain for a while, barely could move. He said, Dave, I don't know if I can get there tonight. I'm really going to try. I don't know. Until 5 minutes before the show, we didn't know if he was going to be there. And I actually had somebody come to back up just in case he didn't show, but he did show up. He was laying on the floor in the green room because he couldn't even sit. He couldn't even sit in the couch. He went on stage. He spoke for about 10 minutes. He was extreme pain. And then, he brought me on, show was great. And then he ended up, not only did he stay because people were so happy that he was there, he ended up staying and doing the Q&A with me, but he wouldn't even take money for the appearance. And that was Charlie. He loved being in the game, and anything he could do to be part of it, he was going to do.
Wow. That's amazing. I think, from my perspective here, watching Charlie over the few years that I've watched him, I think for me, the biggest thing that I've enjoyed is watching his Christian faith be at the center of everything he did. Some people would say otherwise, but I think for me it was pretty clear that his Christian faith was at the center of everything. Did you find that in your personal interactions with him, like in the practical everyday life?
Oh, well, I mean, Charlie made it very clear that was what, there's a video that's been going viral over the last week or so where he says, the interviewer says, what do you want to be remembered for? He says, I want to be remembered for someone that's, stood up for my faith, or a man of God, something to that effect. Look, he did a really nice job of something that we've talked about here, which is blending. He had his personal beliefs in faith, which he was not afraid to share. And then he had his beliefs on what a political movement were going to look like. And those things, they didn't have to completely agree with each other at all times. there's another video that's going viral right now of him on my set from, I think, 2018, where he talks about his belief around marriage. And then he also says that he's very happy that I'm married and will have a family and all of those things. So he was able to hold two thoughts in his head at the same time. And I would say that notion, putting aside marriage or anything else, but the notion of I have beliefs, I have a philosophy, I have a religious construct, and then I have sort of the way the world works and how politics works, and there's all sorts of people who are different from me, and how do I create a movement that will create as much flourishing for as many people as possible. He was really able to do the dance with those things. It's a really impressive thing to do, because you have to be thoughtful, but you have to be smart, you have to be tolerant, you have to be decent, you have to be open-minded, and he was able to do all those things.
Yeah, that's interesting. And a word that I've heard to describe Charlie recently is that he was a coalition builder. And I'm curious if there's anyone else that you think has been able to do that in the past, or do you think could do it in the future, or anything like that?
Well, he definitely was a coalition builder for a lot of the reasons we've talked about here. I mean, I think, if in some ways, if we were looking at it like it was a ship, Charlie had the spaceship. And the spaceship, he was trying to get as many people to go to the conservative planet as possible. And I think what I was doing was giving the on-ramp to the ship. I was helping a lot of the leftists who were waking up and realizing something was wrong here. The libs, the sort of nominally political people. I was showing them, hey, that guy and that spaceship over there, they're not so dangerous, and you're going to be okay. So in some sense, that's how we work together. And that really shows you how we kind of needed each other. He needed me, and this was unspoken between us. So it's not like we sat down and plotted all this, but in some sense, he needed me to soften the idea of a conservative to liberals. And I needed him to soften the ideas of conservatism so that I could come on board that ship myself. So I think that was something that was really nice, because look, we are a massive country of 350 million people from every walk of life. You're not going to force everyone to be Christian. You're not going to force anyone to believe all the things you believe. But what you can do is create a political movement that allows people to come to conclusions the best way, that allows people to pursue their happiness, as is baked into our founding documents. And I really think he understood that. So holding together the Trump coalition post Charlie, that's going to be tricky.
Yeah, and I'm curious, and I will sort of taper off this point. I'm curious where you think America will go from this point, because obviously in the past few years, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of different events that have sort of shaped America. There was sort of the COVID and the BLM riots and that sort of thing. And I remember watching the BLM riots from here. We thought that there could potentially be a civil war. That's how bad it looked from over here. And I'm curious where you think America is going now with Charlie gone and the people that have been awakened by his going. And next year, I believe the midterms are next year, and then a few years on from that, Trump will hand off the baton for his last term. Where do you see America in the immediate future, and potentially in the more long-term future?
Well, I would say that, we're about to roll into our 250th anniversary, 2026. We were founded in 1776, obviously. And I'm very excited about the idea that we could have a year where it will be cool to be for America again. I think Trump has really done that. That's what MAGA was all about, make America great again. You see American flags everywhere. I live in Florida, which is sort of the citadel of freedom. There's American flags everywhere. But I think to the backdrop of an anniversary, a big anniversary, and I think the administration is going to go very big on it, I think there really could be a resurgence of patriotism and optimism and all those things. I also think there's a lot of reasons for optimism in that we've, fixed our borders and our economy is doing really nicely. And I think Trump has shown leadership to the world again, and a litany of reasons that makes sense. All of that being said, the guys that are the bad guys, the bad actors, the lefties, the Antifa people that want to be on the streets, the people that want to take Trump down from the inside, the jihadist element that's in the Democrat Party, all those things, they're not going to go away. So some of that will always exist. But, when I hear a lot of these pundits like, we're one episode away from a civil war or something, it's like, no, we're not. Yes, are we, in some sense, are the states going their separate way? Is it very different if you live in Florida than you live in California? Yes. But that's what the founders set the whole thing up as. And it's working. It's working. I lived in California. It was highly controlled. It was highly locked down. It was high taxes. I left. Now I live in Florida. Cali's not coming to get me. Maybe they'd like to, but they're not. So I think a lot of the safeties that we need are actually built into our brilliant federalist system, which is wonderful. So I'm not worried that civil war is coming tomorrow. However, I would also say that, to the backdrop of what happened to Charlie, if we were to veer into a place where political violence becomes normalized, I mean, that is what happens to societies as they start to fall. So we have to be very wary of that. But I know it sounds corny to say, but I think there's every reason to believe that America's best days could be ahead of it. We're on the forefront of an AI revolution. Like, the world is going to look so profoundly different in 5 years than it looked 5 years ago. And if we lean into that while understanding what really the true markers of America are, we're going to be all right.
That's really good. I think there's definitely hope for America, and I think hope for the West too. So
listen, if it's over for us, it's over for everybody. So you guys better be praying for us. Hate to tell you, we go down, you go down, buddy.
No, we know that security-wise, we know that in every sense, we know we need America, and we're definitely always thinking about America. So Dave, it's been really great to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate the conversation and the insights. And if you want to catch Dave while he's here in Australia, the links for the tickets to his shows are in the description. And Dave, thank you again for being on the Here I Stand podcast.
John, I appreciated talking to you. It's not that often I can explain the liberal leftist thing anymore without my head exploding, because most people have no idea what I'm talking about, but you got it. I appreciate it, and look forward to meeting you.
Thank you.